From Fernando Alonso's electrifying comeback with Alpine to Kevin Magnussen's overhyped second stint at Haas, some F1 drivers just couldn't stay away from the sport for too long. So here are the Formula One drivers who made a surprising return to the track. And of course, I have to start off with a man who made headlines everywhere with his comeback announcement, Robert Kubica. Now, when he began his career in Formula One in 2006, it was with BMW, Sauber, and well, he quickly made a name for himself as a talented driver. He earned his first podium finishes after just 3 races, and it was only upward from there. It only took him 2 years to win his first race, and the Polish driver finished the 2008 Drivers' Championship in 3rd place. But after a shaky run with Renault in 2010, tragedy struck the next year when Robert was involved in a major car accident that left him with multiple injuries, including a partially severed right arm. This forced him to miss the entire 2011 season as he underwent therapy. Fans lost all hope that he'd be able to return to Formula One. So you can imagine their surprise when it was announced in 2019 that he'd be joining Williams Racing as their reserve driver. He was eventually promoted to the team's race lineup in place of Sergei Sirotkin, and veteran fans got to see him in action once more. Many wondered if he would be able to compete at the same level as before his injury. Unfortunately, his return was filled with issues, as the Williams car was, well, a Williams car. If his car had crossed the checkered flag, it was usually much later than everyone else, so his comeback was brief. But while his second shot in the sport didn't last long, Kevin Magnussen's F1 career is still thriving. And even though it may not look like he's a championship contender, he's a veteran of the sport. The Danish racer made his Formula One debut in 2014 with McLaren, and in his first year, he finished second in the Australian Grand Prix and ended the season with 55 points, which was enough for 11th place in the championship standings. Not bad for a rookie, right? Well, after leaving McLaren, Magnussen drove for Renault and Haas, but he was unable to score wins and eventually had to leave F1 at the end of the 2020 season after losing his seat. During his break from Formula One, Magnussen competed in the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship with Chip Ganassi Racing, where he won the 2019 24 Hours of Daytona, an iconic race in the U.S. With recharged confidence, he made a surprise return to the sport when he signed a deal with Peugeot Sport for the 2022 season. So fans saw him compete in the FIA World Endurance Championship, which includes the famous 24 Hours of Le Mans race. And in November 2021, it was announced that he'd be replacing Haas driver Nikita Mazepin. Since then, he's been scoring points for the American team, and he isn't the only currently active driver who was forced to leave the sport. French racer Esteban Ocon found himself without a seat at the end of 2018, right after billionaire Lawrence Stroll purchased Force India and signed on his son, Lance. In just a year, he went from racing alongside Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen, and Lewis Hamilton to watching them race on TV. Esteban has had a strong racing career since the junior formats and often overtook Leclerc and Verstappen in go-karts. But his lack of sponsors meant fans never really got to see him in proper action, since he was always stuck with midfield cars. After filling in as a reserve driver for Mercedes, he signed with Alpine in 2020. Ocon is currently giving tough competition to his new teammate, Pierre Gasly. The only question is if he'll be able to live up to the success of his initial years, since he wasn't the only driver in this dilemma after a comeback. The legendary Michael Schumacher was going through the same thing when he returned in 2010. After all, he'd won 7 world championships before his retirement in 2006, not to mention that 5 of them were consecutive, as he broke numerous records. Schumacher took a step back after competing for 16 seasons, during which he won a total of 91 races. So with such a successful career, you can imagine the reactions of fans as they saw him leave. Many were sad to see him go, while others thought it was the right decision given his age and the younger talent coming up in the sport. Still, you can't talk about Formula One without mentioning Michael's name, and as it turns out, he was just as attached to the sport. After his retirement, he became a consultant for Ferrari, the team with which he won 5 of his 7 championships, before announcing his return to the sport, signing a 3-year contract with the newly formed Mercedes Mercedes GP team. But he had different goals when he sat in the car this time, and he struggled to adapt to the new car regulations. Michael eventually left Mercedes to make way for the next big thing in the sport, Lewis Hamilton. But the world still knows him as one of the greatest drivers ever, and his time with the Ferrari team will always be iconic. But he wasn't the only driver wearing red to go back on their retirement decision, and Kimi Raikkonen's return to Formula One was a highly anticipated one, especially since he was the last driver to give Ferrari a world championship. But to be honest, Kimi was meant to be a star ever since his F1 debut back in 2001 with Sauber. Year after year, he climbed up the leaderboard before eventually lifting the trophy in 2007. But just 2 years later, Raikkonen announced his retirement from Formula One to pursue other interests, including rally driving and NASCAR. He continued to race in various series, including the World Rally Championship and NASCAR Truck Series. But many fans were still hoping for his return to F1, considering how well he was driving in other series. And it seemed like he was hoping to get a seat back too, since he returned in 2012 after signing a 2-year contract with Lotus, a team that was in the middle of a comeback to the sport, something the two had in common. Kimi's first season back in Formula One was a highly successful one, and the Finn secured a win at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and finished third in the World Championship. He almost bankrupted Lotus with his amazing results. After his strong performances in 2012 and 2013, Raikkonen was signed by Ferrari for the 2014 season, but his return to the Scuderia was less successful, with Kimi struggling to match the pace with his teammate Fernando Alonso. After a few more years of on and off results with Ferrari and Alfa Romeo, the Iceman finally said goodbye to the sport. Many fans speculate it was his rivalry with Fernando that caused a dip in his confidence. But while the two battled it out on the track, they had a lot more in common than they thought, since Alonso also took a sabbatical to pursue his other interests after being in a slump. This might come off as a surprise, since he's currently giving Red Bull a run for their money in 2023. But before the two-time world champion was scoring podiums in Aston Martin's rocket car, he was establishing himself as a talented yet aggressive driver with Renault in 2005 and 2006. Alonso eventually moved to Ferrari, where he had a successful stint. But arguments with the then team principal Marco Matteucci got too heated, and he returned to McLaren in 2015. Unfortunately, Nando struggled to get wins and ultimately retired from the sport in 2018. But that didn't mean he wasn't professionally racing. He was extremely successful in the Indy 500 and the 24-hour of Le Mans and the Dakar Rally Series. But Formula One is like no other, and Alonso returned to the sport in 2019 with Alpine. His 2023 stint with Aston Martin is shaping up to be his most successful year since his comeback, but only time will tell if it was worth cutting short his retirement. Well, there you have it. These were some of the F1 drivers who left and returned to the sport.